If you're a B2B business, a B2B tech company, or a B2B marketer, you're in the right place. Coming to you from Studio 26, this is the Interesting B2B Marketers Podcast, bringing you interesting contemporary takes, industry tips, guest interviews, and true stories from B2B marketers in the trenches. Now, here's your host, Steve Goldhaber.
Hey everybody, it's Steve. Welcome back to Studio 26 and welcome back to Interesting B2B Marketers. I'm excited today because we are going to have a great conversation with Christine Bailey. So Christine, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Steve.
All right, so cool. As we always do, we get started with cases, but before we jump into that first case, we just want to hear a quick overview of your background. Tell everyone what you've been up to.
Okay, so my whole career has been in B2B marketing in the technology world and more recently in the fintech, financial technology world. And I've worked for some of the world's biggest companies as well as startups and scale-ups. My passion is customer insights. So that's what I did my doctorate in back in 2008, published a book on in November 2020. So that's pretty much me.
Yeah, and we'll get to the book in the second half of the show, but let's jump into that first case study. And this one is about how you helped scale a tech company, specifically for what's that journey like? How do you compete in a very crowded space? And then ultimately, how do you lead up to an exit? So I'm excited to have you share that story. Go ahead.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, so when I joined, this company was in the SaaS, software as a service, RegTech space, regulatory technology. And there were about 50 people in the company. It was a privately owned company. And they were just one of many in the UK. So it started with coming in, they'd done a little bit of marketing. They were active on social channels and they had some good technology, but they weren't differentiated. And this is something that I'm really passionate about is I love Sinek's TED Talk, which is starting with why. And he says that companies are good at saying what they do and how they do it, but they're not good at saying why they do it. And I'm going to add in companies are also very bad at saying who they are, and what category are they in. And if we think about, why is the why so important? It's like, and Simon says, when we know why we do what we do, everything falls into place. When we don't, we have to push things into place. And if you think, many businesses don't have a clear purpose-driven value proposition because it's actually a pretty hard thing to figure out. And, your prospects, everybody's drowning in this sea of overchoice and sameness. And if you have a clear why, it can really humanize your marketing. And any kind of misalignment, and this is a really interesting exercise to do, is if you go to your top team and say, everybody write down your who, your why, your what, your how, I can guarantee you that people will come up with different answers.
Yep.
And words really matter. You've got to be not just on the same words, the same meaning, and everybody has to, you can't just be on the same page. You've got to be on the same words and the same meaning. So with that in mind, how do you go about creating a market category, which is what we wanted to do for this SaaS RegTech? So we conducted interviews with the senior stakeholders. We asked them, write down the who, what, why, how, compare the answers. Ask the big message, what problem are you trying to solve? And what was the thinking, behind the formation of the company? Because the problem will either come from, or the idea for a company will either come from a market insight or a technology insight. So a market insight would be, you've got a problem that everybody knows is a problem, but you found a new way to solve it. So for example, the founders of Uber standing on a street corner in the pouring rain thinking, wouldn't it be great if we knew where that a taxi was round the corner and we could just call it on an app and pay for it and everything. So that problem existed already, but they found a new technology to solve that problem. So that's one way of doing it. Another way is that you take a technology and you think, what could be a new use case for that technology? And that was the case with my case study. So we asked, what was the thinking behind, what's the big vision? And why did we, what was the big problem that we were trying to solve? So we then created, a draft of the who, what, why, how, as we thought. We then created a messaging house around that. And we went in and tested that messaging on external experts, as well as going to look at the marketing messages of all the top competitors and articulating what we thought were the marketing messages of all the competitors. So we pulled out, okay, what categories are people already owning? where are examples of really good messaging we think is differentiated. And my favorite thing is we created the sin bin. These are messages as like, kill me if I ever
Nice.
use these messages in my marketing. So like those phrases are definitely out.
Yeah, I want to hear. All right, I have to stop you. What are some of the phrases? Because I'm sure we've heard like just the repeated generic, probably has the word solution in it.
Solution, leading edge,
AI powered.
powered, world first. You've caught me now on thinking of some specific examples, but I think we all know what's in the marketing sin bin, and we've all got our personal favorites. But yes, stay away from the marketing sin bin. So we came up with 4 unique differentiators we thought were completely different to everybody else, and we tested those messages on some external experts. And from that, we then created what we called the story. So we went from setting the scene, the situation, what is the kind of implication of, what's of that situation? Sorry, what's the complication? What are the implications? And then we start to present our story. So we used like a storytelling framework to develop the story of the company. We also did deep customer analytics, because the best way to understand what your future market potential is to really deeply understand your existing customers, because that also helps you find other customers or other prospects that look like those. We also did some what we call an ICP, or an ideal customer profile. So we wanted to know exactly, in an ideal world, who are we targeting? So what industry sectors, what job roles, what job titles, what size of company, some customer analytics blended in there. What were the key pain point, description of the personas of the people that we're going after, and also identified who were the key influencers in these spaces and who were the watering holes. So that was kind of like all of the groundwork to designing the market category in the differentiated point of view. Next task, how do we launch this category and this point of view into the marketplace? And it may surprise you to hear, actually, that one of the first places we started with was with the employees. Because if you're not all on the same words and the same meaning, you're not going to take a consistent message. If your employees aren't aligned, you're not going to get alignment with your customers and with your prospects. So we went on a tour to make sure that all of the employees understood our unique point of view, our who, what, why, how, why we were different, our mission and our vision.
What was their reaction to that? Because sometimes I've been in that situation before, where you're so excited, you're ready to roll it out, and they're like, I don't know. So like, were they receptive to it, or did it present to them as like, share your feedback and help shape it?
I mean, given that we'd already taken input from a lot of internal, the senior people, I actually think we got a lot of excitement when we rolled this out, particularly in the story that we were telling. And everyone's like, oh my God, this is, they felt excited to be part of a company that was so unique and differentiated, which hadn't been really obvious before. So yes, I would say overwhelmingly excitement. Still, of course, very difficult to get people to change their words and change their language, and that only comes over time. But we made sure that we told that story to all the existing employees, and I had a personal session with every new employee, because we were hiring a lot of people at the time because we were growing, and they had a session with me, so I would tell them that story and the messaging. And we also wanted to create some content, and I think this was a really key piece for winning the hearts and minds, is we went out and did some research in the market around this idea of how could you bring value, because we were in the RegTech space and a lot of it was just about cost reduction. And our messaging was, you don't have to compromise. You can have a fantastic customer experience, an improved customer experience, as well as getting those efficiency gains. And that messaging really resonated. Don't compromise. Don't just go for cost reduction and efficiencies, technology efficiencies. Using this technology is such a great experience that the employees, the staff that are using the software will find it amazing, and so will the customers. So we did some primary research that, I mean, there's always a bit of a risk when you do primary research that it's not going to come back to you, but it absolutely did in spades. So we used that original content to launch our point of view into the marketplace. So we targeted some conferences. I did a keynote on digital identity at one of the big fintech conferences, and we started generating media coverage in this area.
Yeah.
And we also, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, what I was really interested in is the content. Tell me more about types of content, the channels. You mentioned you were at an event and you get some media coverage, but was that it, or did you have other surrounding pieces of content?
So we had what we created this hero piece of content, which was based on primary research. So we created a lovely report, And from that hero content, we also created lots of, logs and social materials. We also launched a completely new website, and something I'm very passionate about is color psychology. So we worked with a color psychologist and made sure that the color palette aligned to the messages that we were, we needed that to be congruent with the messages we were bringing to market.
Yeah.
And this is where you said, if I'm going to get any resistance, this is where I had the most resistance, because I wanted to change the colors of the logo.
Yeah.
Because quick share on color psychology is there are 4 different color families. And the most important thing is that all of the colors that you pick in your brand palette have to be from the same family, because otherwise the brain gets confused. So for example, if you've got the color red, and it's not from the same color families, then you will pick the negative associations with red. So like danger, anger, aggression. Whereas if you're from the same color family and you see red, you see it. I mean, there's this brain psychology. If you see the red in the context of other colors that are from the same color family, you will perceive red in a different light. You will see it in harmony. You'll see it as vibrant, excitement, passion. So that's why it's so important to have your colors from the same color family. Now, particularly important in your logo. And in our logo, we had from 2 different color families, big no-no. And so the color that we had a green and another color, sort of darker color, which we started referring it to as the puke green. It worked very well digitally, but it didn't work well in the real world. So actually, when we went to print out this color on an exhibition stand, it just didn't work. So I went through this exercise to select colors that were from the same color family, and the logo was the most sensitive subject. Now, little tricks, we eventually picked a color that we called lightsaber green, and suddenly everyone got very excited about, I would go like, do we want puke? Do we want puke green or do we want lightsaber green?
Easy choice, yeah.
And once we'd rolled out the new website in these new colors and new PowerPoint templates, new branding, everyone was like, oh my God, we love this. But that was the hardest bit of the journey.
Yeah, I got to say, I work with a ton of creative directors, art directors, talking color theory, palettes, hues, shades. I have never had the privilege of working with a color psychologist. And like, did that person, like, that is all they do? They
Yes.
literally are blending the worlds of art in psychology?
Yep. It's like they've got like a methodology, and they go to really deeply understand what you stand for as a company, and what messaging, what are you bringing that's different. They do an analysis of what you've already got in your palette, because it's too many changes are difficult, so it's good to see what already is in your palette. You will always find that companies don't have the same color family in their palette, and often in the logo. Yeah, so I've done that in 2 or 3 companies. Actually, used a color psychologist, and I think it's a really important part of brand work that people often overlook.
Yeah, nice. All right, I'm distracting us from the case study because I've just been so interested in the sin bin and the color psychologist. But keep on going. Keep on going.
Well, if I sort of carry on the story, so we launched this into the marketplace. Really clear value proposition, really clear branding with new colors, new website, new social channels, everything. New conference presence, new content. That got us noticed. We got Series A funding. So bearing in mind, we started this journey at sort of end of March. By August, we got Series A funding. And then it was like, go, go, go. The next stage of the journey is to build a scalable revenue marketing engine and to go and hire more people. So what did we do as part of that journey was we set targets. We were already using Salesforce, but we wanted to make sure we had good dashboards in Salesforce. And in order to set the targets, we needed to understand what were the sales targets. And then we did what we call a reverse waterfall, which is a methodology used by someone called Serious Decisions, which is now part of Gardner Group. And it's a methodology to help you calculate back from, okay, if you want to end up with that amount of marketing contributed pipeline, how much are you going to need to put in the top? And you're going to have to look at what already is in your pipeline to understand how much is converting, what's the average deal size, how long does it take in the pipeline, so that you get some idea of what percentages to use to calculate your reverse waterfall. It's never going to be 100% accurate. In fact, probably not even 80% accurate, but it gives you enables you to set some targets. Are we trying to create 100 leads or 1,000 leads? We've got to have some idea of the scope. Then we started doing a lot of work on our website to optimize the website and the lead flow. So we hired a specialist in SEO, search engine optimization, and PPC. And we wanted to make sure that technically our website was performing to its best ability. We made sure we didn't have broken backlinks. We made sure that the referrals were working properly. We wanted to make sure we had a clear call to action. Obviously, we've already looked on, what colors, like this color, you're more likely to click on a button in that color than this color. We made sure that the forms are really simple. So we're really encouraging people to fill them out. I'm sure we all hate it, don't we, when we have to fill out like 10 things on a form. It's like, no, just make it as simple as possible. We just want their name, their email address, their company. In fact, you probably don't even need their company. It's evident from their email address.
Yep.
So that was optimizing the website and the lead flow to make sure we understood how leads were going to flow through the channel, made sure we agreed on all those different definitions and the handoff point with sales, because it's no good us saying, okay, we believe a qualified lead fulfills these criteria if the salespeople go, well,
Sure.
that's not a qualified lead. So we made sure we had a handshake on all of our definitions and agreed on how we were going to track that through the pipeline.
Yep, that's great.
Then we go to another really important piece, which is our data. So if we go back to the work we did with the ICP, the ideal customer profile, it's, okay, do we have those people in our database? And of course, the answer was no. So then we're like, well, where can we go out and source that data? And in our case, we're working in the financial crime space. So we were looking at, where could we, like the Financial Conduct Authority, that could be a good place to go and see if we can source data. So we went to the best possible sources for our data and got that into our systems. And then we started to create and executed integrated marketing campaigns. Now, as I said, I love to create some hero content, which was like the centerpiece of our campaign, but it was all encompassing. We made sure we started, we talked at events, we had email campaigns, we had social selling initiatives. We also implemented intent monitoring. So we were working with a company that gives you intent signals, picks up digital signals, because as we all know, only 3% of our target audience are buying at any one time. So what about the other 97%? They're leaving a digital trail.
Yeah. Question for you on that intent data. That's always been such a mystery to me. And I have skepticism around it. I don't know if it's good or bad to have that skepticism, but I'd love for your take on the intent data that you got. How was it sourced? And did you feel like, this is quality data?
So I've had a bit of a journey with intent data, because kind of right back at the beginning, because I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to data and insights. Intent data was at the company IP address level, which works if you're doing like a global account-based marketing program and there are vendors that will give you that intent signaling within an account. But when I was focusing just on the UK market, that didn't really help me, because I didn't care about what intent or signals a company was putting out in California if I only wanted to sell in the UK. So then intent data evolved and you were able to pick up a local IP address. So at least you could get, you could define it and say, I only want signals from these companies in the UK. But it was still at the company level, not at the individual level. And then you've got now, we were doing a pilot with LeadSift, which was now part of IDG. They were the first company I saw that was able to do it at an individual level, and they could pick up an intent signal that somebody had put out in the digital world. So you could see, has somebody expressed, have they liked a piece of content in a certain area? Have they attended a conference or said they're going to a conference? Are there companies that are hiring in a certain discipline where I'm selling into that job role, and they are suddenly hiring a whole load of people in that job role?
Yeah. So that's fascinating that you got down to the individual level. Was that declared information? So someone went to one of your properties, declared it via like a form. Is that how you were getting to it, or could you get it a different way?
Yeah. So we were getting right down to this individual, and here is their LinkedIn profile address, and these are the signals that they have displayed. So, and you pick which signals are interesting to you. Then you have to figure out what you're going to do with those signals. Are you going to put them into a nurturing program? And we actually categorize the signals, because some of the signals, if you went to a salesperson and said, oh, this person has attended this event, they're going like, that's not a lead. which is not. So we had different levels of signaling that were more or less important. So, for example, if you had a list of strategic accounts, if somebody was signaling from one of those strategic accounts, then a salesperson would want to know that.
Yep.
But otherwise, it was more generalist, and we would put it into a nurture track. So we had what we would call sort of next best action with each intent signal. So we mapped out a path of, okay, here's the signal. This is what we're going to do with it.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, we went from when we started this off, only barely 10% of the pipeline was coming from marketing sourced pipeline. By the end of that year, 50% of the pipeline was coming from marketing. That's the difference that journey made in 9 months. So, yeah.
And how did you? I'm curious. Like you did a lot in a short amount of time. Was this an in-house team? Did you bring in outside partners? What was the mix of talent that you used to do all this work?
It really was a mix. So when I joined the company, or when I actually joined them they were my client to start with, and there were 2 people in the company already. So one was a kind of general marketer who was exceptionally talented at creating content and publishing that content. So they were a bit of an all-rounder when it came to creating and publishing the content. And then we had somebody who was in marketing operations. So they were using the marketing technology and creating the dashboards and sourcing the data and things like that, and doing all of the operational processes. And then when I joined, I brought a couple of people with me that I've worked with for many years. One who's a specialist in, setting up revenue marketing engines, and somebody else who is just a really talented graphic designer and website person.
Yeah. Okay.
Brought those people in. And then when we got the Series A funding, we then had to hire. So I hired an events person. I hired an international marketing person who had language capabilities, who could help us in markets outside of the UK. And then we also hired a campaign person, a dedicated campaign person.
Okay.
And yeah, we just got to just to get to the end of the story is in the November of that year, we got bought, and that journey happened a lot faster than we all anticipated.
Yeah. Take us to the day. How do they make the announcement that the company's been acquired? What was that like?
Well, I guess if you're asking me, obviously I knew because I was on the leadership team. So it wasn't like I wasn't told when everybody else was told. I was part of the process, and we explained our marketing journey along with, everything else that we were doing to the company that acquired us. For everybody else, I think it was a mixture of excitement and sadness, which I think is just natural. It's like, it was always the goal, but everyone was like, oh no, that happened too fast. We were really enjoying this journey.
Yeah. It is tough. I can relate to that. Like, there are moments in my career where I feel like I've had 6 or 9 month or a year stretches, even like when I've worked for some companies for a long time, but like there are those moments in time where for a short window, everything is just working well. You're having a great time. The people are great. The work is great. And then something happens. So yeah, I can relate to that bit of a letdown, even though there's still excitement because you did achieve a goal.
Yes. I think what carried us through was the team. The team loved working together so much that we've all stayed together.
Yeah, that's great. I do think that reminds me of the old saying that you join a company, but you leave a boss who's not working out, right? So it is the people that keep you there. This is great. It's a great case study. And now I want to transition over to get to know more about you as a marketer. So take us back, your first job in B2B marketing. Tell me about what that was.
So I studied German and business studies at university, and I spent my 3rd year of university in Germany. So I made some contacts there. And as soon as I graduated, I went back to Germany, and I started in press relations actually as a PR assistant for Hewlett-Packard. And I remember my boss at the time, I knew him, and he sort of opened the door for me to interview there. And he said to me, they'll ask you if you're afraid of computers. Correct answer is no. Right.
Are you afraid of computers? I've asked some people that today who might be afraid of computers, but yeah, that's a great question.
So that's how it all began. And I always knew I wanted to be in marketing. I've always had a passion for marketing. I didn't know it was going to be in tech, but having worked in that international environment in a PR capacity, and then I became the PR manager, and then I looked after industry analyst relations as well. And then I'd had enough of living in Germany, and I wanted to come back to London. And it was difficult at the time to work remotely. And I had a very forward-thinking boss at the time, and he said, well, just relocate. You can do the same job that you're doing, but you can be based in London. And I did that for a year, but it was hard. I had a black and white laptop computer with a pop-out mouse at the side, and I had to connect. I had to literally dial up via the telephone.
Yeah.
And it took forever to log in with scrambling things and entering a code, and then it scrambled a code back. And my telephone bills were just horrendous. They were like £800,000 a month because I was dialing into Germany. So I did that for a year, and then it was like, this is really too hard.
Yeah.
And at the time, you're kind of young and adventurous, and you're not. Everyone said to me at the time, "Why would you leave Hewlett-Packard? Nobody leaves a big company like that." I'm like, "Well, because it's just not really working. In having to, we're not quite ready for home working." So then I joined a PR agency, a high-tech PR agency, and set up their analyst relations practice, and got to know some other clients. And one of the clients was Cambridge Technology Partners. And I met somebody there who I instantly gelled with, who's been just the most amazing sponsor for me throughout my career. There's a pattern that, where he's been behind all my significant roles in my career. And he set up, this was back in 1995, the first online community for chief information officers, CIOs.
Oh, nice.
Completely new, amazing thing. And we took this to, I took this to market from a PR perspective. We got so much PR coverage. And eventually he said to me, we need to expand into Europe. And would you come and work for me and build out the European community? And I'm like, yes, I would love to. So that's when I'm doing this online community. And that was just such fun. It was a strategic marketing initiative. And we grew the community to, we had over 1,000 members in Europe, about 3,500, 4,000 members globally. And then it was at the end of the 90s, that .com bust, where the company was sold. And it was sold to, well, initially the community was sold to somebody. It was a big publishing house, and they thought that they would kind of get the community if they just bought it. And they didn't take any of the staff that were managing the community.
Okay.
And what they bought was a very expensive database, because it just tanked as soon as people weren't managing that. And of course, people understand that now, but they didn't back then.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating because those communities that were in the late 90s, even like 2000, 2003, they meant so much to people because it was so unique. And today, you think about it, for every subject or niche, there's probably like 30 different ways for you to connect with people. So community today is never as strong as it used to be when it all just started. And that's too bad. Like there are great communities today, but I just think it was like, before the internet, you had to go to a conference to speak to like-minded people. And it was like the 1 or 2 times a year. And those were amazing times because it was like, oh my God, this is the only way for me to connect with people.
Yeah.
Yeah, the role of community is certainly changed.
Yeah. And I was lucky enough to be working with one of the world's experts in online communities at the time. So I learned so much from her. But yeah, I mean, from there, I went on to working for a CRM consulting firm. Again, a bit of a pattern here. It was a smaller company that had made various acquisitions. And that's been a pattern, is I love to go in and figure out, how do we make 3 completely different companies become one company? How do we create that unique value proposition and that brand? And how do you create the infrastructure and the systems to make that work? And then, I've ended up doing that for several companies, actually.
Yeah. All right. So you and I have something in common, and it is that we have both written a book, which ironically, you were talking about problem solving before, which is what my book is focused on. So it was an interesting connective point there. Tell us about the book and why you decided to write it.
So back in 2008, I published my doctorate, which was on customer insights. So it was how large UK companies use customer insights to acquire, develop, and retain customers. And my goal in doing the doctorate was always, I'm going to write a book, publish a book. I'm going to get material for that book. And then life got in the way. Life had other plans. So I ended up, when I was handed in my thesis, I was 9 months pregnant, and I got offered this amazing job at Cisco. So the time to write a book was definitely not then.
Yeah.
And I also can't recommend handing in your thesis and your viva, I was 9 months pregnant when I handed it in. I had my viva when she was 6 weeks old. It's not something I can recommend, but that's sometimes, life has other plans for you. So I just plunged straight into the role, and I was with Cisco for 8 years and never got to write the book. And then it was only when I kind of had a bit more breathing space, should we say, when I started thinking about, do you know what, I really would like to write that book. And it was actually a scout from Kogan Page, my publisher, came to a conference that I was speaking at, and they came up to me afterwards and said, we're looking for female authors. Have you ever thought about writing a book? And I was like, Funny you should say that.
Yeah. I've done more than thought. I've already started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess what was really important to me is that I wanted it to be a book that practitioners would read and find useful. So I wanted it to be written by a practitioner, me, but also I interviewed 33 people altogether. So they are other practitioners, other academics. It's full of expert opinions and case studies. I really wanted it to be, for practitioners by practitioners.
Nice. It's interesting. When I had been doing a lot of content creation for my business, and it was in the form of blog posts. And while that was good for me to articulate kind of my opinion, I found it tiring to write, because in a blog post, you're like boxing for attention, right? Like the headline's got to do this, and it's got to have all these hooks inside. And if someone gets tired, 10 seconds into it, like they're done with it. And after doing all those, I said, you know what? A book feels really interesting, because once you've bought it, you've committed to reading the book, or at least half of the book if it's not good. But I really enjoyed that media, because it just felt like I didn't have to fight for attention. It was like, all right, I have your interest. Now I can tell more stories and bring in more anecdotes.
But
yeah.
Funnily enough, actually, I have quite a detailed prologue in my book, which is called Break Free of Your Comfort Zone. And it's all the reasons why, or techniques that you need to kind of open your mind to thinking differently about how you do things. Because I thought, I don't want to plunge straight into what I need to do, which is explaining what I mean by customer insight. So more of the slightly more academic side of things is, okay, what are our different data sources and how do we turn that into insight? I thought, I can't just start with that. First, I need to get people into that frame of mind that they're open to, learning something and doing things a bit differently and breaking out of their comfort zone.
So once you had agreed to do that with the publisher, how long did it take for you to finish the book?
Well, I was working full time while I was doing it. So it took me about 12 months with sort of a chapter every month. Researching, interviewing people, writing it.
Yeah.
So it took about a year to write.
As hard as it is to write a book, what I really enjoyed is the book is a passport, and it takes you many places. For example, interviewing people. I did some cold outreach and got interviews with senior CMOs at big companies, and it was like, you can't get those just on cold outreach usually. So it was very fascinating that people really respected that process, and they were usually open to having conversations. Do you have a similar experience, or like what are some places the book took you that you might not have gone on your own?
I think just what you've said, it gets you to speak at conferences. I mean, it's hard to differentiate between the doctor title obviously helps as well with the sort of credibility and the thought leadership. So I think it's hard to sort of separate one from the other. The book gives me really good content to speak at conferences or things like this about it.
Yep.
And it evolves. It was a much better book being written 12 years after I published my doctorate, because the world had evolved. And back in 2008, when I had a prediction section in my doctorate, and I said, inbound marketing is going to overtake outbound marketing. We're going to have much more digital data. Insights and personalization is going to be at a level that we can't imagine now. And everyone's like, yeah, right. And of course, 12 years later, those things have come true. And I wish I'd said it with a louder voice at the time. But
tell me, I'm going to ask a couple questions on, you've spent so much time in your career around insights. What are some of those things that you could share with the listeners to say, here are some techniques that are like quick wins, right? There are things, yes, you can spend weeks and months in doing research or looking at data. What are some fast things that they could do where if they're like, you know what, I've got like a week and not a huge budget, what would you recommend for them?
So I think the most valuable insights are ones that help you understand your audience, help you understand the success of your marketing efforts. So if nothing else, think about, in actual fact, in the book, we've got at the end of each chapter, we've got some ideas. It's a little section called Feed Your Brain, and it gives you some ideas of things that you could do right away. I mean, I'm just literally the page I've opened here. Start with the basics. Write down what data and data sources you have and where's your data stored. How do you analyze your data? Are your customers clear about the value they'll get if they share their data? That's just one thing, but it's full of ideas. So I think if people want to start about which area of marketing, and I would say literally every area of marketing, you can use data and insights, whether it's, okay, do we have a unique and differentiated mission statement and value proposition? Maybe you need some market research to do that. Customer analytics is always a great place to start. Do you understand the customers that you have today? How many customers do you have? You wouldn't believe how many people can't answer that question. What do they look like? What's the profile of those customers? Do you have good prospect data? Are you targeting the right people? Do you have an ideal customer profile? And then if you're in the content space, are you producing content that enhances your SEO, for example? Is it driving people to your website or to your landing pages? How is your content performing? Are you just producing content and then throwing it out there into the world and you don't really understand how it's performing? And one thing I talk about is dusting off the digital shelves. People are very good at putting stuff on the shelves, but not dusting the shelves, like not taking it down when it's served its purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such a great point. There's that mindset of just like, oh, we've hit the publish button, now we're good. We'll just let it sit there. And the need to refresh, or as you're saying, dust off. It's so powerful, especially from an SEO perspective. It's just sending signals to Google that good things are being updated here. So yeah, it's great mindset. What are you, looking back over your career, what are some things that you've learned where you're like, you know what, if I had to go back, tell my younger self something, what would you share with yourself?
So I don't think you realize how bold you are when you're younger. It doesn't feel like you're taking bold risks at the time. So it's almost like I'd go back and congratulate my younger self for doing things that I just wouldn't do now, because the older you get, the more obstacles you put in your own way. So like, I'm so glad that I had the courage just to move to Germany and, go and live in Germany and work in an international environment for 5 years. I'm glad I had the courage to leave a huge global company and go and work for a tiny one, to get that experience of being agency side. I'm glad I had the courage to, go and work with startups. Yep. So yeah, I think I would go back and congratulate my younger self for taking those risks.
I do like that. I can relate to that. I think there are things that you do when you're new in your career. You're very convicted, right? Because you believe in it so strongly, and you just kind of say, all right, well, let's do it. And then later in life, you get a little bit more comfortable, maybe a little more risk adverse. So that journey is an interesting one, and a good reminder to tap into our 20-year-old selves to ask how they might think about a certain decision or situation.
I think one decision that was really hard for me that actually turned out really well was when I started doing my doctorate, because it was funded by the company I was working for, and I went down to working 4 days a week and started doing the doctorate, which was a part-time doctorate, took 4 years. And then 6 months into that journey, the company was acquired and I was made redundant, yes, which was devastating at the time, but actually turned out to be a real blessing in disguise, because I took the decision not to go and get another full-time job and to really focus on enjoying the doctorate journey and to accelerating it, doing it in 3 years instead of 4, and doing some consulting work with smaller companies to pay the bills. But I've been in a redundancy situation 3 times in my career, and a lot of people don't recover from that. And each time it's taken me to a better place. So I don't fear it. And that's probably advice I would give to my younger self, is what seemed like terrible at the time has always ended up in an opportunity. Yeah.
I agree. It is such a difficult thing to go through, but you realize that the health of the company is usually not there to treat its employees the way they want when they're doing, laying off people. But
I mean, they were all for different reasons. A couple of them were due to sales, the company's being sold, and the other one was a big restructure. But yeah, I think that kind of stuff, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That's something I would go back to my younger self and say, don't sweat it. You'll end up in a better place.
And I think too, like once you've been through it, you start seeing the signs of it. When things don't sound right, or you're hearing different discussions happening, usually it's around M&A activity. You're kind of like, something's weird. Like, I don't know what it is, but something's going on. I had a project where I was trying to redo an entire global site, and I had to work with a couple different business units, and some of them just wouldn't engage. And they couldn't because they were trying to sell their division, and I didn't have that context. So my lesson to people is always, if something is not happening and you're really frustrated and you don't know what's going on, usually there's something bigger going on that just you can't talk about. And don't get frustrated. Just know that, like, okay, something's happening. I don't know what it is, but it is hard. It's a strange environment, because as companies do position themselves to be sold, some things are wound up, And then others are wound down because it's like, well, we don't need to invest in this right now. Something else is happening.
I think another piece of advice, which I've actually said to somebody in the last 24 hours, is if something doesn't scare you, if an opportunity doesn't scare you, then you're not pushing yourself enough. You're not going to grow if you're not scared a little bit of what's ahead.
Yeah, that's great advice. Christine, thank you for joining the podcast today. If someone would like to purchase your book, where can they go find it?
Amazon. You can find it on Amazon, or you can go to Kogan Page's website.
Awesome. All right. Well, Christine, this has been a really good conversation. Thanks for coming on the show. It was wonderful to get your experience and insights. Insights are just such a rich territory, and I love listening to stories about people who've dedicated their career to that. So thank you, listeners, for paying attention. And if you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe. And I look forward to catching you on the next episode. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to the Interesting B2B Marketers podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast so you never miss an episode. If you found value in today's episode, please help grow the podcast by sharing with others and leaving a review. We'll see you next time.